Welcome back, everybody. Today, we want to talk about your brain, and not in a scary way, but in a you deserve to feel vibrant, clear, and whole kind of way. So many women in midlife are noticing shifts in energy, focus, memory, even identity. I've said many times, we even have a listener who told me to stop mentioning it, where I was like, my brain. Like, I'll just kind of in the middle of talking, mention my brain. So this is really timely. Today, we want to ask, like, what's happening in our brains and how can we support ourselves through it?
Our guest today is Dr. Amanda Wiggins, a behavioral scientist and neuroscientist who brings deep experience in both corporate strategy and human-centered research. She's the founder of the CGP Lab, where she helps organizations design cultures that actually support well-being, not just in theory, but in practice. Amanda has worked with major global brands to help people not only perform better, but feel better. She's passionate about helping women rediscover their vibrancy through brain-friendly practices. And today, she's here to share how even small changes can lead to big shifts in midlife. Amanda, we're so glad you're here. This seems like the perfect topic for our listeners.
I'm excited. Welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
All right, so let's kick it off. Let's get right to it. Let's start with what drew you to this work and what's made you so passionate about helping women take care of their brains, especially in this chapter of life.
Yeah, so my background is in neuroscience. I'm a bit of a neuroscience nerd at heart. I did an undergrad honours degree in neuroscience here in New Zealand, and then loved it, and so kept going. And I took myself off to the University of Melbourne in Australia with just a backpack on and a few $100s back in the day, as you do.
Wow.
I did a PhD over there, which I also really enjoyed. And after that, I headed off to UCSF in San Francisco and continued my studies doing a postdoc there. So that was very much in the kind of molecular neuroscience space at that point in time. Towards the end of my time at UCSF, I was doing a lot of like counting cells and things down a microscope, which means you book out this tiny dark room, you get to work, you lock yourself in there, you kind of come out at the end of the day and you're all like, oh my gosh, what just happened? I've missed a whole day. And I kind of had this feeling of unease growing in me that this is just not for me. It's not my best skill set to sit in a dark room and count neurons or do this really detailed, really reductive stuff. Um, so yeah, at that point I joined the Society for Cell Biology, who at that time, so this was a good, I'm going to say sort of 19 years ago, something like that. And they were doing advocacy trips out to Washington, D.C. at the time. And a bunch of us scientists would get on a plane, fly over there and go and meet with various senators and talk to them about R&D funding. It was really fascinating to me to kind of had this light bulb moment. You can influence at the top level.
Mm.
You don't have to be one of the ones stuck in a dark room, but so that was kind of what got me out of the lab and into a different sort of field of work. And after that, I moved back to New Zealand. I worked in government regulations for biotech for a while, and then made the move into the corporate world about 11 years ago. So
Wow.
my passion really, it's a combination of brain science, but it's about really recognizing all these hardworking scientists everywhere around the world doing amazing work, getting that out of the lab and into a space where people can use it. It can do good for society. So that's where my passion lies, my specific interest around kind of midlife brain changes and how that influences what happens later in life with our brain is a bit more personal, actually, a bit of a more personal connection. So yeah, I've had a couple of family members now affected by dementia.
Mm.
My lovely aunt passed away from Alzheimer's disease a few years ago, and seeing what happened to her was just it was just nothing short of shocking, really, to see someone lose who they are, lose their ability to even recognize their own children. And then
Mm.
an even closer family member is currently going through vascular dementia. So it
Mm.
really just brought it all home to me there's all this information out there, but it's not really talked about how we can protect ourselves from this fate or reduce our risk of developing dementia later. And it actually kicks off, although we talked about, before the show came on, midlife, it actually kicks off earlier than that. And it's really this message that I want to talk about today around what we can do, starting from early, midlife, and then later, to make sure we're sharp as a tack as we go into those golden years, so we can be the golden girls and have fun.
I
Yeah,
love
so
that
that's
because
it. That's the sort of prolonged background.
no, that's fantastic. And gosh, I hadn't really thought about that. We hear about studies on dementia and Alzheimer's, and
Mm,
my dad died of dementia, or he had dementia before he died, and then my
mm.
mother-in-law also had vascular dementia. And you're right. It's like we talk about it, but what are we doing to prevent it? I love the
I
idea of getting it out of the lab and talking about it.
Mm.
also there's just, I mean, what we know too about Alzheimer's and dementia is that we're just so woefully behind on studying the female brain because of all the very, very sexist remarks from scientists saying that women's hormones messed up their studies, so they didn't really want to study
Oh,
the female brains in the mice. So we're woefully behind on
oh,
understanding when and how that
absolutely.
develops for women. Ugh.
I saw an interesting thing pop up on my news feed this week, which I immediately just jumped on, which was that people of our age group are less likely to develop dementia than people of our parents' age group, right? And the younger generations even more so. So there's a reduced risk profile going on.
Hmm.
They're not exactly sure why, but the leading hypothesis is that it's because of women's access to education, which has increased significantly from our parents' generation to our generation to our children's generation.
Huh.
And we know that starting from very, very early age, more education is associated with a 5% risk reduction in developing dementia later in life. Isn't that interesting? Early
That
childhood
is.
education. Yeah. And
Uh,
so
Wow.
that
yeah.
to me really speaks to the use it or lose it aspect of brain health. We know this for
Right.
our bodies. We need to keep using our muscles, particularly middle age and beyond. Otherwise we'll get muscle wasting, sarcopenia. And we know that, right? That's a really well publicized message. We've got to get out there and do some strength exercises and whatnot. But the brain is similar. You've got to use it, otherwise you'll lose some of those connections. So yeah, that early
Mm.
childhood education. And really interestingly to me, this popped up this week around women's increased access to education being
Ooh,
such a strong predictor factor.
I want to read that. Yeah, you mentioned your mission is about helping people look after their brains so they can show up as their most vibrant selves, which is great, right? That includes, education. That feels like such a hopeful frame,
Yeah.
especially when so much of the messaging about midlife is about loss or decline. So what's something most people don't realize about the brain at this stage?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We get better at judgment. So we get what you would term wise, right? We have all this
Yeah.
experience and our decision making improves compared to younger people. So
Hmm.
that's the standout benefit there. Yep. We get better at making
Mm.
decisions.
That's really interesting. We've talked in the past about having no fucks left to give because as we hit through, as we've gone through menopause, and our estrogen goes down, which is the carrying hormone. Geez, if only my tongue would work. And so that we've also over the time talked about the crone, and you're right, wise women and so forth. And yet I don't think I've ever completely connected it to, yeah, that's our brain. We have all this experience and we aren't just flying by the seat of our pants the way young people are. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's right. And also, look, I'm in the change of life right now. Wow, that
Welcome.
brain fog element is next level, right?
Yeah.
You you actually wonder if you're going insane. There was a period there, but you come out the other side.
Yeah.
True. Yes.
That's the great message. It all works out, right?
Yeah.
I went to an interesting talk a few months ago. An Australian researcher who studies the changes in female brains as you go through pregnancy, postpartum, and then eventually through menopause. And the bit that pricked my ears up the most was the sort of the menopause and, that stage where the kids have left home or leaving home. And her research showed that the changes that happen in the brain are indicative of getting back to self-care, self-love, and self-identity. I thought that is so interesting, isn't it? Because if you have children and you've spent 18, 20, maybe longer years caring for others as your primary sort of thing, you do eventually get back to who am I, sense of self. That's right. I used to be this. I'm probably a bit of a different person now, but that kind of connecting with yourself was really interesting.
But that's also interesting because no worries. And we so often, what Carrie and I talk about a lot, and we have retreats around your next best chapter, right? So you're right. As people now, women that come to our retreats are all ages, but more often than not, they're your age and our age above. And one of the reasons they come is because they are at this point where they've spent so much time, maybe a third or a quarter of their life taking care of other people. And now all of a sudden it's like, shoot, what is next for me? So that I don't know if you know the answer to this, but based on that little bit of research, I'm curious if the women that can easily turn to taking care of themselves and self-love and self-care, and it's like, okay, now I'm back to my time, have less of a chance of having dementia or Alzheimer's versus the women who are like, shit, what do I do now? I don't know my identity outside of taking care of somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, there's some really interesting research around protective factors in what we would call later life, although it's not exactly later life. But social connectedness is a really strong protective factor for protecting your brain against dementia later. And so the stat around that is a 5% reduction in the risk of developing dementia if you remain socially connected. So I think...
Wow.
That makes us think of the blue zones. Yeah. Like all those
that's
octogenarians.
right.
Yeah. Or centenarians.
So I think the onus there is join groups. What are those things you've been thinking of that you never had time to do because you were so busy cooking dinner for everyone that are now accessible to you? And there's so much cool stuff you can do. So I myself recently joined a waka ama group. So that's rowing, but in a traditional Maori type canoe. You go out in groups of 6 in a canoe. What I love about it is it's socially connected. It's really fun. We have a great laugh. You're out on the water, so in amongst the sunshine here in Nelson, New Zealand, and it doesn't actually require any sporting prowess, which is even better for me. You get a good workout, you get a bit of a cardio workout, you definitely get an upper body workout and an ab workout, so it ticks a lot of boxes. And I also have a really fabulous group of women that I meet at the gym on a Friday afternoon. That's one of my absolute highlights of the week. So it's bringing that social and connected element to having a workout, which ticks 2 boxes. So I love that because I'm still pretty time poor. So, if you can tick more than 1 box at once, that's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to, Carrie, what you and I say all the time. Yeah. Women heal in community. This is literally science now. Women heal in community.
Wow. And then also I'm thinking about our health coach training too, and what we know about the hormones that are produced in the gut that like fuel the brain, and then the exercise that you're also describing. Like it is multiple systems working together to pump oxygen and feel good hormones to that brain too. So, I mean, it's like doing it together releases, what is that? Like probably oxytocin, and then like the actual exercise and the, moving your body is probably boosting your serotonin is what I'm guessing. I'm not like super well-versed in that as much anymore, but that sounds like it's all kind of pumping what the brain needs.
That's exactly right. Yeah, oxytocin, serotonin, and a bit of dopamine, which is the reward
Dopamine, that's the one I was.
hormone. You feel good, you keep going back for more. And look, I can tell you, I feel a heck of a lot better after that workout than any other workout I do in the week, because I've had not much of it, a bit of a chat, a bit of a catch up. Everyone's in this often in a similar frame of mind on a Friday afternoon. Get me to my gin and tonic is the sentiment frequently.
I'm here for that.
Not advocating alcohol, which is a neurotoxin, of course. There's my favorite study in the whole world around protective factors for brain health is a Lancet Commission study that was published last year, 2024. So the Lancet Commission is a group, a conglomerate of the world's best minds around dementia. So it includes researchers, physicians and care experts, and they come together once every 4 years to review all the latest science on dementia, prevention, treatment and care. And they've just published their most recent update late last year. So that goes through the life course. And as I mentioned earlier, the first protective element they identified was early childhood education. And then they go through into the middle part of life, where there's a number of factors, and all of these factors add up together to potentially 45% modifiable risk associated with dementia. So if you addressed all of these things in your life, you would have reduced your risk of developing dementia by a staggering 45%. Now, I think that's pretty significant and worth talking about, because, a lot of us have seen loved ones with dementia. It's not how we want to end up ourselves, right? So we've got to do everything we can.
Wow.
So, maybe if I could talk a bit about some of those midlife risk factors.
Yeah, I would love that.
Please. Many of them are what you would expect, but some of them are quite unexpected as well. So depression was identified as something that contributes a 3% risk for developing dementia later. So that's interesting, isn't it? And the thinking there is that it's not the brain issue itself that's leading to this increased risk. It's the behaviors that are associated when someone has depression. So retreating in, not connecting, not exercising, not eating well, those types of things tend to be associated with depression. So I think the key message there is, if you or someone is suffering from depression, or think you might be, get out and see your doctor, because it is actually addressable. Physical inactivity, not surprising. Keep your blood vessels healthy by pumping blood through them frequently as much as you can. What I love about this as a busy CEO and mum, I've still got 2 kids living at home, is even 15 minutes of brisk walking a day is protective. We can all do that. There's no excuse.
Let's say that again. 15 minutes a day. I think so often people think, well, if I can't go to the gym for an hour, then screw it. I'm not doing anything.
Right.
15 minutes a day. And even that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that could be 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Right.
Yep. Something is better than nothing is the message. Yeah. So interesting. I just love that, because everyone's got time for 15 minutes. And it gets you out often into the sunshine, which vitamin D is good for you as well, essential. So that's a good one. Diabetes, obviously, that's quite an obvious one. So high blood sugar leads to what's called glycation endpoints, which damages blood vessels, which reduces blood flow to the brain. Smoking, probably don't need to talk about that. Hypertension, interesting one. This one I find really interesting, actually. So our brain is in a skull, right? It's like a fixed volume, but we've got blood pumping up into our brain from our heart. Every time your heart contracts, you have a mini increase in blood pressure in your brain and in your body. But what's interesting about your brain, it's like this fixed space, right? And so you imagine if you had a hose that was totally rigid and you pump through pressure, right, over time, that's going to cause damage, as opposed to something that's flexible that can kind of handle it. So, in the brain with elevated blood pressure, what tends to happen is you get damage to the tiny blood vessels called capillaries, and that's what really feeds in the oxygen and takes out the cellular waste. So addressing elevated blood pressure, really important in midlife. So there's some really, really high-tech in silico modeling where they've modeled the damage that happens to small blood vessels in the brain with high blood pressure. And it's like what would you call it? Like an accumulation model where your brain can sustain the blood vessels can sustain a bit of damage. It can repair itself to a certain extent, but it sort of accumulates and accumulates over time, and it reaches a tipping point around age 70, 75, where we know there's a big step increase in the risk of many of these neurodegenerative diseases. So the theory there is around, blood supply just being absolutely crucial for maintaining that brain health. There's a couple more in there as well, which I think are worth noting. So hearing loss is one of the factors that was identified in this most recent Lancet Commission update, 2024, 7% reduction in risk if you get your hearing sorted.
So even just getting hearing aids that work helps.
Absolutely.
Which I will tell you. Yeah. So I'll add to that because you're right. My dad had autoimmune disease, a pretty rare autoimmune disease called Wegener's granulomatosis. And essentially what it does is things would disintegrate. So like the first thing that he lost or the reason we were even found out he had it was like he would blow his nose, and at the risk of TMI, sorry everyone, his nose would kind of blow out. Like it was like it wasn't just mucus, it was his nose. And so one of the first things that happened was he got his eardrum started to disintegrate. So he had hearing loss that we couldn't even really do anything about. But for a short period of time, we got him on good hearing aids, or even better hearing aids than he had. And yeah, it was very short because he was suffering with dementia. So I think at some point he took him out and threw him away. But for that hot minute when he was wearing them, his life was better. Yeah, because you talk about the connection. He couldn't hear. So he'd come to events, but he'd just sit like a lump because he couldn't hear anything, And so there was no actual human connection, even though he was physically in the room with somebody. So thank you for saying the hearing loss piece. I think we thought that at the time, that was huge, that he couldn't hear.
My sister, who works with elderly population, says that's one of their biggest concerns is talking to the families, because she's in a residential setting, talking to the families about how to slow down the rate of dementia by getting their hearing checked and making sure that not letting them go, it's fine, they don't work, it's fine, because then they just start to disconnect and they really advance much more quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting release. I'm really sorry to hear about that condition your dad had. That sounds really, really awful. Yeah.
It was interesting because he was somebody growing up. He had taken such good care of himself, and he had it for about 10 years. And we have never been able, nobody would actually ever tell us at the end that the Wegeners cause the dementia, but I wholeheartedly believe that it does. We had one doctor who said, yep, that's pretty possible, because the reality of it was everything was disintegrating. And so why wouldn't it have reached his brain at some point? We have no dementia on that side of the family. So he took really good care of himself until he couldn't anymore, and I just think it had gotten to his brain at that point.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you off if you're still on your list. Are you still? I do have a question about stress and burnout, but maybe you're getting to that.
There's a couple more. Yeah, there's a couple more on the list. Traumatic brain injury is one of these emerging areas that's of great interest. So we now know that even a minor head knock earlier in life leads to increased risk of dementia later. Yeah, and they think that is again due to the vascular damage that occurs even in a small head knock. So that, I don't know about in the US, but here in New Zealand, rugby is huge. It's part of our national identity. We don't wear the head gear or anything, or some players wear a small headgear, but it's becoming increasingly obvious that a number of these retired players are really suffering from rapid decline. And so the New Zealand Rugby Union there's a lot of pressure on them to take action. So they've recently implemented mandatory wearing of these mouth guards that can detect the amount of force, I guess, that someone has had in a knock.
Oh, that's interesting.
Get them to sit down. It's not but it's not enough. They get them to
Right.
sit down for 10 minutes or whatever, and then they're back in the game. So, gosh,
I
look,
mean, we have it
I
here
think
with
about
football
my own
players.
kids. Neither of them play
We,
rugby. I love rugby, but I'm kind of glad that my kids aren't rugby players, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. I mean, we
yeah.
have it with football, not soccer, but our football, American football, and they do wear helmets. And yet, yeah, I mean, it feels like at least once a year we're hearing about a Hall of Fame football player having a traumatic brain injury, or them realizing as they age that they've had that all
yeah.
the hits they've taken has caused them to have dementia or whatever because of that.
Mm,
Yeah, and
mm.
there's a lot of like corporate greed that kept that from getting
Yeah.
public, and a lot of people have suffered. I
I
have
think
a
a
son
lot
with
is.
a
Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
no, go
Karen.
ahead. No, you go ahead. Finish.
I just going to say, I think a lot is going to come out on this in the next 5 years. We'll just watch and see. And
Yeah.
I think you're right that there will be some finger pointing that these big sport organisations probably should have done more earlier.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so keenly aware right now of just the fragility of brains, partly because I have a son with a rare genetic mutation that causes uncontrolled seizures, and he's had a lot of brain injury related to the drop seizures that happen. And so listening to that, oh, it's tender for me. But
Mm,
Yeah.
also, my sister-in-law had a horrible accident last fall on a scooter. She wasn't wearing a helmet. She's a big proponent of helmets now, and just actually middle-aged people staying off scooters. But I like it is still like she is still not fully functioning
mm,
at her normal rate. And like
mm,
I was talking to my kids about this, because especially young people, they love to hop on a bike without a helmet. They love, and it's like these heads of ours are way more fragile. These brains are way more fragile than we realize. I mean,
mm,
it's amazing how much they have taken, but we're now learning over time it really does take a toll, and can lead to things later in life that wouldn't have otherwise if they'd been prevented. So listening to this, I'm like,
mm,
ooh, some of this is too late, but it's good to know.
Wear the helmet, wear the helmet, wear the helmet, just wear the
Yes.
helmet.
Yeah.
Mm.
Ugh.
The other one that was interesting that popped up in this most recent, and this is probably the last one that's I think really
Mhm.
interesting, that in this most recent Lancet update was the effect of air pollution.
Oh.
So kind of seems like a no-brainer, but it takes a while for these scientific bodies to really recognize something because they require a huge amount of evidence, right? So now it is incontrovertible. Air pollution increases the risk of dementia by about 3%. So
Wow.
that's, gosh, I mean, some people live in places that are terribly polluted, and there's not a lot you can do. You can buy an air purifier, and if I was living in a big city that had an air pollution problem, that's what I would do. I would probably wear a mask outside if I was regularly commuting each day on a bike or something like that as well, because it's really the heavy particulate matter that is the cause of the problem there. So, yeah, I thought that was quite interesting
Yeah.
too. I think just
Mm.
in terms of how, science is quite slow to move, often compared to almost what I would call like wisdom, right?
Mm.
A lot of air pollution is going to be reducing your oxygen and delivering toxins into your systems. We know that. But anyway, now the Lancet Commission's caught up on that. So that's good. And hopefully that will spur on governments to take action, globally.
Mm. Wow.
If only.
I did want to ask too, just about like, I mean, you really beautifully touched on the things that are happening, in midlife that people are used to. And I don't know, you've probably heard we have a little bit of stress going on over here. Um, so when we
Mm,
pile on just the, like I'm a caregiver, but a lot of us have caregiving responsibilities, and we're in a sandwich generation, taking care of parents and young people.
mm,
So like there's the balancing the work, there's so much
mm.
financial and like, just like societal stress right now. So I'm just wondering what the research says about burnout and stress and, the cortisol stuff that's happening because of
Mm.
all that, and how that's like causing long-term damage or increasing our risk.
Yeah, cortisol is a very toxic thing when prolonged, right? We need a bit of cortisol injected if we need to jump out of the way of a oncoming car or run away from a leopard back in the day. But yeah, prolonged cortisol exposure is very, very damaging to all parts of the body, actually, not just the brain. Um, it's really a big problem, right? For all the reasons you pointed out, Kari. It's not easy to get away from these huge responsibilities these days. But what I find quite interesting is, the research around more simple and easily accessible techniques like mindfulness, even a brief meditation, stepping outside and doing, say, 3 salutes to the sun, pretty easy yoga move, that has such an instant effect on reducing cortisol. Cortisol takes a couple of days actually to get out of the body, about 48 hours. So when you feel that stress coming on, like, I feel it here. This is where I feel it, right at
Me
the front
too.
of my body. I tend to try to step up or do this, just get things moving a bit, and I just do the big, like, I'm meant to be really sciencey, but I do these things. I have to stay in good shape because I run a company, I run a household, and if you come crashing down, there's a lot of stuff that comes crashing down around you, right?
Yeah. I have one more quick question about, and you didn't mention it. But again, going back to my experience, this was with my mother-in-law.
Mm.
Again, no dementia in my husband's side of the family. At one point, they said that we were told if she had only done a CPAP mask, that she had sleep apnea. And so if she had only worn a CPAP, she may never have gotten dementia. It was vascular, and they just felt like she had, I guess, essentially not had oxygen to the brain, maybe. I don't know. So anything on sleep apnea or sleep and its connection?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I'm not familiar at all with the connection between sleep apnea and later dementia, but there's very good evidence that you need a decent amount of sleep each
Right.
night to clear out the earlier signs of the toxic buildup that happens prior to and leading up to dementia. So getting
Ah.
sufficient sleep is a huge deal. It's like your brain it's when it takes out the trash, basically.
Mm.
Okay.
So sleep apnea. Not
Would
only
it,
do you have reduced oxygen to your brain, but you have an interrupted sleep the whole night, right?
yeah, and hers was bad.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
gosh.
Interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm. Wow.
that's really tough. So the company that excuse me, sorry about that. The
No
company I'm
worries.
leading at the moment, called the CGP Lab, we're all about restoring vascular blood flow, particularly to the brain. So our hero molecule, which is called cyclic glycine proline, or CGP for short, it's a dipeptide. So most people will be familiar with the amino acids glycine and proline. We have our
Yeah.
manufacturing process basically mashes them together and you create a cyclic dipeptide, it's called. What's interesting about the cyclic dipeptide, one, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's like a really small water-soluble molecule that gets across our gut. It gets into our brain. So that's based on earlier research that was done by the company back in 2018. And there's a huge body of research underpinning how it works. So it works by regulating a hormone called IGF-1. And what's interesting about IGF-1, it's involved in the whole life course. It peaks when we're in our sort of late teens, kind of early 20s, and then declines as we get older. IGF-1's main role after that kind of adolescent stage is to maintain the function of blood vessels and
Mm,
to particularly repair the tiny blood vessels, the capillaries. So yeah, I got involved with this company in last year, 2024. I'm not the founder. I'm an employee. I'm the CEO, and I'd been doing some work with the company prior to joining them formally. I'd been consulting, helping them develop some new products, and the opportunity came up, and I was so impressed with the research, and particularly that element around being able to cross the blood-brain barrier. I decided to jump in to help get the company through the next stage of growth. And so we're selling our supplements online. A lot of our customers will be middle age. In fact, all of our customers, 97% of our customers are 45 and older. We get
okay.
quite a few customers who take our product to help them get through a particular brain challenge. So we have customers with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and it's not a cure. I'm not one of these miracle cure people at all. At all, in case you can't tell by now, I'm a person who fully respects high quality evidence. The reason that these people with these particular brain challenges take our product is because of our CSO, Chief Science Officer, whose name is Dr. Jian Guan. She's spent her life, about 30 years, researching the role of CGP in the recovery from particular brain challenges. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
Can you say more? So if they're taking this supplement, and what do they find from taking it?
Yeah, so most of the feedback we get from our customers is around clarity.
Okay.
Yeah, and also with the Parkinson's patients, that they are able to have more movement, more purposeful movement. So that's interesting. And in fact, the study that kicked off the company, which was done in 2018, was on Parkinson's patients, and they were given capsules containing a blackcurrant extract. And later, after the study was finished, the founders of the company met Dr. Jian Guan at a Parkinson's conference, got chatting to her, managed to convince her to test the blood samples for CGP. They thought, no, there won't be any CGP in here. It was a blackcurrant company at that stage. And lo and behold, these patients had elevated CGP in their plasma and also their cerebral spinal fluid. So yeah, it was that discovery of CGP and blackcurrants that actually kicked off the whole company. And the study was done with one of the leading Parkinson's clinicians here, Professor Tim Anderson. So yeah, it was that discovery of CGP and blackcurrants that spurred us on. And so yeah, that's why we have a following of people with Parkinson's.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can we, I want to ask something else before we, if you have a little time for this, because I don't want to like derail from sharing that, because I think that's super important. But I also just so curious about the work you've done in like corporations, like where you're noticing, how they operate and how, like, and just like about how women function best. You mentioned something like that, and I would love for you to share more about that. Like what are the biggest mismatches you saw between you've seen between how women function best and how most workplaces are set up? Because that was fascinating. And I know it's kind of a departure from what we were just talking about, but I think it all comes together with women understanding how their brains are not being thought of in the way that things are set up and the way things are going. And then they're so busy, and we get to this place for like, how do I slow this down? And I just love how all of this is such great prevention. And I want to hear more about that.
Most of my work in corporations has been around brands, actually, rather than sort of corporate behavior. I guess my own experience of being in the corporate boardroom has been fairly interesting. It's not unusual to get the feeling of being in an old boys club. In a boardroom. You can sometimes be the only woman. I really love the advice of Sheryl Sandberg. Back in the day, she wrote that book, Lean In. I read that book when I'd just gone back to work after having my first baby. I found out I was actually pregnant with my second one just a few days after I got back to work. And here's this book that turns up, Lean In. And it's that concept of leaning in as a woman. As she said, she would go to these meetings where all the men would have a seat around the board table, and the advisors, who were often women, would be seated one row back, essentially. And her advice that I still live by to this day is just lean in. You have got nothing to lose sharing your voice. Do not be intimidated by these men. It's quite likely that you know more than they do. Not a given, but the other thing I've noticed about working with a lot of men and the difference between men and women in the workplace is, I think with women, we are often quite hell-bent on problem solving, right? So we're given a task or a project, and there are things in there which are sometimes insurmountable. They're things that could be institutional barriers, or product problem barriers or team barriers that you can't, you turn yourself inside out trying to find solutions. You leave work machinating on it. You go home, you're still thinking about it the next morning. You have a terrible sleep, right? Because you I don't know if it's just the maternal instinct or whatever, but you need to prove yourself. You need to solve the problem. You need to make it better. So we do this thing where we try to make impossible situations possible. What I've noticed about men is they don't do that. If they see an impossible and insurmountable problem or barrier or challenge in a project, they just go, we can't do that.
Yep.
Move.
I can't tell you how many times like Lisa and I and like other friends that Lisa and other friends and clients are having this conversation. It is
Really?
The conversation. It is one of the conversations of the moment, is just noticing. It's especially true in the marriage of a friend of mine, because they just sold a really successful business together. And so being married, they get this comparison all the time where she's like, aren't you just wondering like who we leave this to and how, like, and he's like, nope, I did it. Like, nope. Like his part, he's just out of there. And she is like perseverating on how this should go and the legacy and all that. But like, this is fascinating because I love having your much
scientific
more,
brain.
Scientific explanation of that, because it is something we're constantly, I mean, Lisa's always like, God, I wish I had the confidence of a mediocre man, but like we just
no, wait, no. I have more confidence than a mediocre man.
You were saying, I wish more women had the confidence.
That's true.
That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's just the way, like, and even like really non-mediocre, even exceptional men, like they don't perseverate that way, the way women do.
Agreed. And I think that we can take, I'll never forget working with a person who's become a dear friend now, Terry. I hope he won't mind me mentioning this, and just taking a leaf out of his book and being like, oh, okay, I'm just not going to sweat that. It's not solvable. Move on.
Yeah.
It's not yours to carry.
Yeah, that's right. We carry a lot. I think women have incredibly broad shoulders.
Yeah.
Right. We carry the weight of our children's day. We carry the weight of our partner's day. We carry the weight of our own day. And we do it. We just keep on going. And that's because we're carers and nurturers, and we have to.
Yeah.
Right. Do you guys remember bringing your first baby home from the hospital?
Yeah.
And that when the penny drops, that you're like responsible for this life. You can't go anywhere. You are here for the duty, and in that instant your shoulders grow broader, right? Because you're going to take whatever comes at you to nurture and care for and raise this child. And I think that's phenomenal. The other thing I've noticed about women is I think we're much better at reinventing ourselves than men, because again we have to, and a lot of that is, and I'm only coming, my experience is of being a mother, so I don't have the experience of not being a mother, but going through pregnancy, that bringing that baby home, realizing that you're responsible for it forever until they grow up, that is a massive transformation, right? It's actually like getting off a spaceship on another planet. That was my life before. Here I was partying, having a good time, wondering which shoes to wear out. There was a classic one in our household when we had two small children at home. My husband got to work and realized he was wearing mismatching shoes.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing, it's interesting because what you're describing is mental load. And Carrie and I, we often record 2 pods on the same day. And so we were just doing one that came out earlier this year about love languages, and one of the love language being like help carry the mental load. I don't know how old your kids are, but Carrie and I both have kids in our 20s, and spoiler alert, it doesn't end when they're 18. I mean, that's the thing. You carry, and fathers do too, but it is just different. I am actually in a situation currently where I am noticing I don't begrudge my husband this, but I am carrying the emotional strain of some stuff that my daughter's going through. in a way that he is not. And so where
Mhm.
I have never thought to myself, I wish I had more confidence like a man, what I have actually thought to myself and actually said to somebody last week is, I wish I had the ability to let it to disconnect from it the way a man does. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I'm jealous of it. You know, I
Mhm.
find
Mm.
myself twisting and turning in bed. He's sleeping fine. It's not that he doesn't care. He totally does. Women just carry it differently. We just do.
Mhm. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. And I think, just with that mental load, there's an element I'm really interested in terms of the corporate world, which is decision-making fatigue, decision fatigue.
Yeah.
And this is really recognized in, management theory and whatnot. At As we go throughout the day, our decision making gets poorer because we've already made so many decisions. And it
Yep.
starts from when you get up, what should I have for breakfast? What am I going to wear to work? Which route am I going to take to work? Right. And so some notable people like Steve Jobs, for example, wanted to reduce his decision fatigue. He wore the same outfit every day.
Right.
I think that's
Right.
genius. And
It's
I saw
true.
a really good example of this by a mum who posted on LinkedIn recently around the idea of a capsule dinner. So Monday is always tacos, Tuesday is always burgers, Wednesday is always etc. 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 You
Yeah.
don't have to expend mental energy making a decision. You already know what it's going to be. I've implemented this. My
That
kids
is
they were like, Mum, does that mean we're always having tacos on Monday? I said, yeah, but it
yeah.
can be different. Yes,
I
basically get
mean,
you. But yeah.
I brought this up before in other episodes. I used to work for Weight Watchers, and we learned that people make 200 food decisions a day. Just
Yeah.
food decisions. And so, yeah,
Wow.
often we'd be in a meeting and people would say, God, by the time I get home, like that's when I tend to eat the worst because we're exhausted.
Yeah.
So a
Mm.
bag of chips is way easier than
Oh,
making a salad.
This is so weird to say, but I remember when I was 6 months pregnant with Peter, I got kidney stones, and
oof.
I got it like right before a procedure because I was hospitalized. I won't get into that whole story, but I got a shot of something that was apparently safe for the baby. And I had a full-time job. It was a high stress job at the time, and there was a lot going on. My boss was stressed that I was taken out of the mix. And I just remember whenever that came over me, I want to say it was Demerol, but I don't know what it was, something like that. I just remember going, like I didn't have to make a decision. I didn't have to respond to anything. I just remember the feeling in my brain of like, and I said, I kind of understand drug addicts at this moment. Like it just really took all the things that people were needing me to decide on or get back to away. And it was temporary. It was minutes, right? But it was like this just brainwash thing, like this wash that went over that I thought, oh, that's a good, like I've thought about that since. Not that it would make me want to try anything, but I thought about, I wish there was
Mm,
some way to just kind of go, and flush out your brain for a minute, which there is.
Yeah.
mm,
Obviously, meditation helps with that and things like that. But I'll
mm,
never forget, like that was probably the first memory I have as an adult where I could feel the relief to my brain.
that's so interesting. I when I take a long haul flight, I get that sense, right? Because often there isn't Wi-Fi on board, so you're disconnected. And boy, I love getting on a long haul flight. Everything's switched off. It's just me, movies, a meal served to me by someone who's cheerful and smiling. I just love that. I feel like you'd almost just want to take a long haul flight just for the fact of disconnecting from life for a bit.
Yeah.
There's a lesson there, right? We should just do it more.
Absolutely. I
Totally.
just got off a plane and I was like, I can't ever figure out how to do the Wi-Fi. And so I just don't. And it's like
Yeah.
4 or 5 hours of not having to think
Yeah.
about it.
I same,
So,
same.
so let's just, before we kind of wrap up with everything, there was something that you said that was just really fascinating to both Carrie and I, which is culture doesn't scale, rituals do. And so we've mentioned a couple of different times meditation and getting out and trying to free the brain when you're feeling stress and those sort of things, this idea of ritual, and especially for busy women, they may think to themselves, like, oh crap, I don't have time to add a ritual into my life. But it is a powerful reframe. So, can you explain a little bit more about what culture doesn't scale, rituals do means and how that can be some of the simple steps to do the prevention of dementia and Alzheimer's?
When I think of ritual, I guess I think of the brain and its reward center, right? So we get a little spurt of dopamine and other good stuff when we do stuff that's enjoyable to us, and it brings us back to do that thing again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's relaxing for our brain, that's healthy for our brain, it's healthy for our body. And so it's finding small pockets of time in your day where you can undertake these small, pleasurable, and by pleasurable, I mean your brain gets a little reward. I don't mean pleasurable as in go eat a huge ice cream and, it doesn't have to be a big deal like that. Ideally, something that's physically healthy as well as being
Mm-hmm.
pleasurable. And your brain then starts to look forward to that. And it's like an off switch in your day, a mini off switch in your day.
Yeah.
So for me, I work from home a lot of the time. I actually have a yoga mat set up in my office where I get up and I do my salutes to the sun and whatnot. I've also more recently implemented being quite strict on doing a skincare regime before bed, quite a minimal one compared to what
Beautiful.
some people do. And can you believe it? At this age, I've only just discovered how much of an off switch that is to me, because now my brain
Yep.
looks forward to it. The cleanse, da 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 da.
Nice.
And I transition that. To me, that's the final transition from washing out all the business of the day to get ready to go to bed, making sure my brain is a sort of more in the switched off state. And I've been doing that for probably 3 or 4 months. I just look forward to it like there's no tomorrow. I'm just like a Pavlovian dog looking for the treat, like, whoo, this is good. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds lovely. That's good. It's like for anyone listening who's thinking, I don't have time for ritual, what's like one little thing you feel like people could try that would be really doable and be brain supportive?
Yeah, I mean, 3 salutes to the sun, standing up, getting your shoulders
Mhm.
down, just 3 deep breaths and centering your thought in your body is like a mini mindfulness thing that anyone can do anytime.
I love that. Yeah, it reminds me, Carrie, of when we talked to your friend, Dr. Krista, and we talked about
Yeah.
sleep and the idea of having a sleep ritual. So we did it when we had kids, right? Our babies had
Mm,
sleep rituals. We gave them a bath, we gave them, lavender lotion. And then all of a sudden we stopped doing that for ourselves. Our babies slept better when they knew that their body, like they learned
mm,
that this is now time for bed, a book or
mm,
whatever it is. So I think it's amazing that you've noticed that difference for yourself, that it's the
mm,
last piece that helps you calm and go to bed.
mm,
Rituals don't have to be, again, like exercise, it doesn't have to be a big to do. It can be
mm,
very simple and easy.
mm, absolutely. I think that's the key message, really, of this discussion that we've had today. Exercise, even a small amount, de-stressing. Gosh, I know there's even research around, patting a pet brings
Yeah.
around oxytocin and
Let me
serotonin and
tell you.
dopamine. Pat your pet, give them a hug. Ooh.
I know.
This
Carrie's
happens a
got
lot
two.
for me.
Oh,
Mabel.
cute. Oh my gosh. Adorable.
No, it is. We've gone through, quite a bit of trauma around here with my son's seizures. And I've told Lisa before, I don't know what people who go through trauma who don't have a pet to hold, like, I don't
Mm,
know what they do for themselves. Like it is such a calming nerve, recentering for me, for
mm,
sure.
mm.
So yeah.
This conversation has been phenomenal and so much good information. We always wrap with a song, and I know you have a really fun one that I love, so I'm excited about that. But I just really quick before we end, where can people find your supplements? Is it something that is worldwide? Can you give us, we'll put it in the show notes for sure, but just can you tell us where they can find these supplements?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're online at ctpmax.com and we ship globally. So we
Great.
do have quite a
Nice.
few customers up there in the US.
Good.
Hello to them if anyone's listening. I'm wondering what my song was. I know that I've sent this to you, but I can't actually
Well,
remember what
it
it was.
was
It's a good
She's
one.
a Rainbow by Rolling Stones.
Love that song.
I know.
Oh,
As soon as I read that, I was like, oh, I can hear it.
And
And it's just
I
so,
also, it made me immediately picture that episode of Ted Lasso, which was so
yeah.
precious with that song too.
oh, I love Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit? Do you remember why you picked She's a Rainbow? What is it about that made you pick that for your song?
To me, it really connects with the whole my whole identity of being a woman. A woman, you wear so many hats. You've got so much color inside you, and just let it out and lean into it. And it's that whole just get to the
Oh,
stage where you don't give that many F's. Just
Yeah.
let all this color out. Be multifaceted. Be the rainbow of color. Shine it out there. Let
oh,
your inner
oh.
self out.
That's such a beautiful image. I love it. And from everything you're saying and everything we know, I would say being your full color self is great for your brain. It's like
Yeah,
you're not doing
yeah.
anything to hold yourself back. So I love that. I love that as a great symbol of that. And I'm just so grateful we got this time with you today. I was very excited to talk about this. Lisa and I are very much talking about our brains all the time. So this is really topical for us and our listeners. And I just appreciate your time and for sharing your science and your energy and your insight with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure having the discussion.
Thank you for that. And for those of you who are listening, if this conversation resonated, send it to a friend. One small step towards supporting your amazing brain and your friend's amazing brain. And then we will be back next week with more things that we know.